in the Great. Now that that's started, I think I can go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on behalf of William Daroff, CEO, Malcolm Hoenlein, Vice Chair, and myself for this webinar Zoom call on analyzing the current anti-Semitism crisis. These last 2 weeks have seen a rise in anti-Semitism here in the US and globally in a way that the only word I could think of has been harrowing for our community. And today we have 4 distinguished guests who each have a deep knowledge and expertise that they're going to share with us. And I'll introduce each of them as they begin speaking. FYI, we're on the record for this conversation. And as a reminder, please use the hand raise function if you have any questions, and we hope to have ample time for Q&A. We've asked each speaker to spend about 5 minutes on their topic. Our first speaker is Oren Segal of ADL, and he'll give us a perspective from the data. What have we seen in the last 2 weeks? Where is the anti-Semitism coming from? How is it manifesting both online and physically? And how does this tie in with ADL's recently released survey of 2020? As Vice President of the Center for Extremism, Oren and his team combat extremism, terrorism, and all forms of hate in the real world and online. Recognized as the foremost authority on extremism, the center provides resources, expertise, and training, which enables law enforcement, public officials, and internet and technology companies to identify and counter emerging threats. Oren joined ADL in 1998, where he focused on the activity and tactics of extremist groups, movements from across the ideological spectrum, training law enforcement officers and publishing reports and articles on a wide range of extremist topics. Oren, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your comments. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and good to be here and see a lot of familiar faces, from Mitch to Holly to Brad and everybody. So since the outbreak of this conflict earlier this month, we have been tracking a disturbing array of anti-Semitic activity. This activity is at once both terrifying, but also in many ways not surprising. It comes at a time of historically high anti-Semitic incidents on the ground. As we reported last month when we issued our audit of anti-Semitic incidents in 2020, for example, we documented 2,024 anti-Semitic incidents on the ground, which was the 3rd highest year on record since we began pulling this data together in 1979. And the year before that was the highest year on record. You know, this conflict also comes at a time where Jews are feeling particularly vulnerable because of the violent anti-Semitism that has targeted the community over the past couple of years, whether it's Pittsburgh or Poway or Muncie or Jersey City, just to name a few. But Jews are also feeling vulnerable because they're being scapegoated by those who conflate criticism of Israel and the Israeli government and its policies with criticism of all Jews. So during the 2 weeks of the latest conflict, anti-Semitic incidents reported to ADL increased by 75% compared to the 2 weeks just before the fighting began. And that's from 127 incidents to 222, according to the preliminary data that we've collected. And I should note that these reports keep coming in for these particular timeframes. You know, among the incidents that we've been tracking, that we've heard about, that communities have reached out to us about, are a number of men waving Palestinian flags who drove to a restaurant and attacked a group of Jewish diners in La Cienega Boulevard in sort of the heart of Jewish Los Angeles on May 19th. We've seen repeated attacks in New York, including a widely seen video of a Jewish man being beaten in broad daylight in Times Square, and fireworks thrown at others. Another Jewish man in New York was wearing a Star of David necklace and punched by a man who allegedly asked him, "What's around your neck? Does that make you an effing Zionist?" And in Florida, as just another example, a Jewish family was walking home from synagogue when they were harassed by a group of individuals who allegedly yelled, "Die Jews, free Palestine." So this spike, by the way, is not just from before and after the current crisis. We looked at the same period of time in 2020 and in 2019. And this period of time, we've actually seen a 171% increase from last year during this time, and an 85% increase from 2019. Now we're investigating every one of these incidents that are reported to us. We're going to continue to provide support to the community, but also expose the narratives and messages that are driving this hatred and violence. We continue to track, for example, anti-Semitism on a wide range of online platforms, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and a million other platforms that you may or may not have heard about. And these messages include explicit anti-Semitism, for example, praise of Hitler, right? So for example, an analysis we did of Twitter in the days following the outbreak showed more than 17,000 tweets that used a variation of the phrase Hitler was right. And I should say that data is just a sampling. It's just a fraction of the full picture when accounting for the fact that we only look for these comments in English and not in various other languages. Anti-Semitic posts on 4chan rose by 348% from, again, before the conflict to after the conflict. 4chan, for those of you who don't know, is a meme-making hate machine that serves to amplify and spread hatred and has real-world consequences. So we've been receiving reports too from concerned community members, especially parents whose children are observing this anti-Semitism in the context of Israel on their social feeds, many for the first time, and are really kind of unsure on how to respond, how to make sense out of it all. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the extremists who we've been tracking, who have been engaging in anti-Semitic activity on the right, have also elevated their activity, trying to exploit the crisis in the Middle East to promote their own brand of anti-Semitism. So for example, a neo-Nazi group called Vanguard 18 planned a protest in Hollandale Beach, Florida. They arrived after the event was over, thankfully, but left behind various propaganda, including Israel did 9/11 and Antifa is a Jewish mafia. Another white supremacist group protested a pro-Israel rally in Orlando, Florida, and at that time shouting at the pro-Israeli folks, Jews are the synagogue of Satan and Hitler should have done his job better. To be clear, these extremists are not affiliated with the thousands of protesters we have seen take the streets elsewhere in the United States. We have tracked over 200 of those anti-Israel protests thus far. And while the majority of those protesters have stayed within the lines of free and civil discourse, we have observed expressions of anti-Semitism there too. These messages include signs that invoke the classic accusation that Jews killed Jesus, that Jews control the media. They have featured support, explicit support for Hamas and Hezbollah, and also a wide range of Holocaust analogies that frankly have become all too commonplace today. So in closing, we're concerned when blame is assigned to Jews as a whole for the policies of the Israeli government. We are concerned when protests against these policies occur at Jewish institutions themselves. We are concerned about the use of Holocaust analogies that demonize Zionists as a whole. When you describe all Zionists as Nazis, as the epitome of evil, it implicitly demonizes millions of Jews around the world who identify as Zionists, regardless, by the way, of their position on the current conflict. All too often, we've seen how these narratives and campaigns have real-world consequences and how they can lead to real-world violence. So we simply don't have a luxury to ignore them, and we're calling on elected officials, community activists, faith leaders, business executives, social media influencers, public figures, and everybody else to speak out against anti-Semitism so we could try to stop it in its tracks now. Thanks.
Oren, thank you for that very sobering update. Our next speaker is Brad Orsini from Secure Community Network. And Brad is going to give us a 16,000-foot perspective of the security concerns around the country, particularly with regard to physical security, how police and law enforcement on both a local and national level are handling the latest incidents. Brad joined the Secure Community Network as a senior national security advisor in January of 2020. where he provides security consultation, training, and direct response to critical incidents for Jewish communities across North America. From 2017 to 2020, Brad served as the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh's first Director of Community Security, where he provided security consultations, building and organizational assessments, training, drills, and threat mitigation to cover 60 organizations, including the full breadth from schools to daycare centers to synagogues to camps to various other Jewish organizations. Prior to joining the Jewish Federation, Brad was a special agent of the FBI from 1988 until his retirement in 2016. Welcome, Brad. Thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be with you all this morning. And I'm going to pick up right where Oren left off, and just really talk about the last 12 hours for us nationally. A JCC in Florida, graffiti inside the building, not outside the building, inside the building. Anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian graffiti. Numerous cyber phishing attempts throughout the country, not just one place, numerous. A suspicious package in Southern California where a hazard team had to come in and review that. Harassment of Jews in an Israeli-owned pizza shop in Southern Florida. 6 incidents of tire slashing at a Hillel in New Jersey, where cars had Israeli flags in their car. Firing campaign in South Carolina. These are just a few incidents just over the last 12 hours. Just like Oren stated, we are seeing an absolute increase in these last couple weeks after the first rocket flew in Israel. We see an 80% increase in anti-Semitic incidents that we are working active investigations with law enforcement right now, doing that same comparison that Oren and ADL did that's really hitting our community hard. We have a 29% increase to our duty desk in that same period of time, with incidents that really are demonstrating an increase in violence, an increase of physical threats, physical vandalism to our communities. We are working with law enforcement on a 24-hour basis throughout the country with our 50+ folks that are security directors across the country. We are really monitoring at our duty desk the amount of pro-Palestinian demonstrations that have, by and large, been calm, but on various occasions, there have been incidents that Oren has described that we have seen. And so we monitor every one of those incidents or those planned demonstrations that are being reported to us. Really important in a community to report that information up to our duty desk. We place that on our map. Our intelligence analysts, who are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, are monitoring these events. We have an increase as well in actual vandalism and suspicious activity reporting, and it is only increasing in our community. We are also have a growing list of persons of interest, people who have identified and we are identifying as a potential threat to the Jewish community. We continue to work with law enforcement on our persons of interest files. We provide information back, exchange information on a daily basis with our law enforcement partners to make sure those people are identified, watched, tracked, and attempt to mitigate any potential acts of violence. Really important that those persons of interest get reported to us. And I don't think Oren and I and the ADL and SCN are in lockstep on the idea of reporting. We really need to stress to our organizations that there is nothing too small to report to us and or law enforcement. We need to get that true threat out there and understand what that assessment looks like. The same thing goes with our Hillels, our 550 Hillels. We see a dramatic increase for obvious reasons on campus and the reporting from all our Hillels. We need to continue that reporting to our duty desk in an effort to mitigate any attack that may be on the horizon. We're also working with our communal organizations. We get calls every day that a new pro-Palestinian demonstration might form, especially in areas of the country that really may not even have a big Jewish population or a smaller Jewish population where we don't have security coverage. And probably the number one question I get asked is, is it dangerous for us to go out there and counter protest? And of course, safety, security reasons, we don't encourage that. We do encourage to fly the flag, Israeli flag, and fly it high. However, when we enter into those pro-Israel rallies, which we absolutely highly encourage, we need to also plan for safety and security around any one of our events that we are looking when we show support to Israel. Because every time we have one of those events, we will see the threats on the back end. So any group out there that does not have a good plan for security, please let us know. We really want to work with you on that. So a couple tangible things we're doing here in the next couple weeks. June 3rd, next week at noon Eastern time, we are pushing out a national situational awareness webinar for the entire Jewish community across North America. You can register for that on SEN, and that webinar is really based for anybody in our community, from kids all the way up to our senior citizens. It's going to be basic situational awareness. We really want to give the tools to our community that when they're walking down the street or they're in their car, to really think situationally aware, to help hopefully give them the tools and the empowerment to mitigate one of these attacks as they're walking down the street and not to be a victim. That's June 3rd. On June 15th, we are doing a national cybersecurity webinar. We've been doing numerous cybersecurity webinars for the USCJ and others on June 15th, which is open to the public. And the last thing I want to talk about, probably the number 2 request we've been getting is having discussions in the community about firearms and the faithful. Our community wants to arm themselves. I encourage anybody that's dealing with that issue, reach out for us. We like to have facilitated discussions on that. That could be perils and pitfalls for our community, putting the guns in people that should not have them. Also, as we work through this conflict and the rise in what we're seeing now, we're also preparing our organizations for the openings of all our schools in August, and high holidays are coming early this year. If you have training requests, please push them out to us, whether it's situational awareness, countering active threat, May is Stop the Bleed Month, why that's so important, in just that basic threat assessment on how we need to analyze that threat in every one of our communities. And with that, Diane, I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much for those comments, Brad, and emphasizing the importance of reporting. Now we're going to hear from Mitch Silber from Community Security Initiative, and he's going to talk about how anti-Semitic incidents have manifested themselves in New York, and specifically the most recent incidents. He'll talk about what the mayor, the governor, and NYPD have said and done, and we'll look at New York specific ways to improve security and cooperation. Mitch is the executive director of the Community Security Initiative, which is a partnership between UJA Federation of New York and the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. He's a founding principal at the Guardian Group, an intelligence and security consulting firm. And prior to his work there, Mitch served as director of intelligence analysis at the NYPD, where he was the principal counterterrorism advisor to the deputy commissioner of intelligence and was responsible for building out and managing the analytic and cyber units. Mitch is a visiting lecturer at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, where he teaches a course on modern urban anti-Semitism. Mitch, thanks so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Diane. In thinking about what we're seeing in New York, I can't help but go back to 2014 and think about the last time that Israel and Hamas went to war. In Western Europe, we saw a very different phenomena from the US. We saw riot in the streets, we saw smoke bombs, we saw attempted assaults, we saw synagogues being attacked. And I think that phenomena, which we didn't see in the US in 2014, is now here in the United States. And most specifically, a version of it is playing out here in New York. And the reason I say that is because when we look at a lot of the violence that we've seen in New York, many of those incidents have been on the periphery of pro-Palestinian protests. You've seen some of the incidents, the firecracker, the beatdown of the young Jewish man near Times Square, the caravan of hate traveling throughout New York City. Some of the other incidents you might not know as much about was a confrontation between a group of pro-Palestinian protesters outside a police precinct on 51st and 3rd in New York, or an assault in front of a synagogue in South Brooklyn, or the suspicious rock or brick that was thrown at a kosher pizza place. So we're tracking these incidents. We right now have 12 incidents since the war began, and 9 of those occurred in Manhattan. 3 of those have been in Brooklyn. And in terms of our view, in terms of the trajectory of this, I would say up until about a week ago, we thought that law enforcement really was on top of it and had things under control. Last Thursday night was really when things spun out of control. And again, there was a pro-Israel rally in Times Square. There was an unauthorized pro-Palestinian group that showed up and immediately developed. And then on the periphery of that were some of the most heinous incidents that we've seen: the beatdown, the firecracker in the Diamond District, and some of the other incidents. So what's happened since then in New York? Well, one of the questions you posed to me is what has been the response from elected officials? We'll start at the top with the governor. The governor has obviously condemned the violence and in fact has made the New York State troopers available to Jewish institutions all throughout the state, but most prominently downstate. And we've seen those New York State troopers show up at locations that we've picked out for them to show up at. So we've appreciated that. As far as the mayor goes, we've been in direct touch with the mayor through UJA Federation, Eric Goldstein. And in fact, the mayor has said, listen, tell us what you want us to do tactically in response to the failure last Thursday, and we'll do it. So we actually have sent to the mayor's office the particular police tactics that we want employed, and we've seen results on the ground. And then thirdly, obviously we cover Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, but the 5 boroughs of New York. We had a very frank call with the Deputy Commissioner of Counterterrorism and the Chief of the department last Sunday morning, myself, Eric Goldstein, Michael Miller from JCRC New York, where as a friend of NYPD, we said, listen, we were very disappointed in what happened last Thursday night. We thought the department was undermanned and unprepared. And, what do you have to say about that? And I have to give the NYPD credit. They acknowledged that, they were not prepared for these spin-off violent incidents on the periphery of the protest activity. And essentially, the number one, they vowed to do better. And number two, they put myself and my team in direct communication with the patrol borough commanders all throughout New York City. And those are really the commanding officers who control sort of the boots on the ground. And the reason for that is to make sure that we're coordinating where we can identify locations where we think there needs to be a greater police presence, and then they can deploy their forces in that way. Brad mentioned the protest phenomena. We, with our intelligence analyst, who's frankly embedded on Oren's team, that's one of the things that we're tracking, given this, this connection between protest activity and violence. So we've already flagged 5 different protests this weekend in New York City, in a multitude of different boroughs. NYPD has been warned, and they are going to take appropriate precautions, for those different protest activity. In terms of what can we do to improve security and communication, I think it's really, making sure that those lines of communication are open, sharing intelligence. Our analyst is in constant communication with the SCN analytic team, with the analyst out in Los Angeles, out in Ohio, the team that they have there, as well as benefiting from working with the 18 or so other people who are in Oren's shop. So having this intelligence and warning as to what might come our way, I think helps us prepare best for however this may morph in coming days.
Okay, thank you so much, Mitch. We really appreciate the focus on New York.
Sure.
Our next speaker is Holly Huffnagle from American Jewish Committee, and Holly will talk about what we're seeing in the U.S. in the broader context of what we have seen in Europe over the course of the last number of years in anti-Israel anti-Semitism and the importation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what lessons and best practices we can use here in the US. Holly serves as AJC's US Director for Combating Anti-Semitism, spearheading the agency's response to anti-Semitism in the United States and its efforts to better protect the Jewish community. Previously, Holly was the Assistant Director of AJC in Los Angeles, and before coming to AJC, Holly served as the Policy Advisor to the Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at the US Department of State, and as a researcher in the Mandel Center of Advanced Holocaust Studies at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. She was also a scholar in residence at Oxford with the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Holly, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Diane, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Conference of Presidents for convening this session. I wish we didn't have to have it, but I'm honored to be here along with my co-panelists. So as Diane said, I've just been asked to kind of bring us into a kind of a broader context. As some of you on this call know, AJC has offices in Europe. We've had them for 30 years, and have actually really seen some trends that I think Mitch actually set this up perfectly, that we're actually beginning to really see here in the United States. So I'm actually just going to be sharing some lessons that we've learned, and I think we can bring here. So what happened really in the early 2000s was there was a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe that really did differ from the traditional understanding of the term. So we still had far-right xenophobic anti-Semitism. European Jews all of a sudden though were now being attacked as agents of Israel. And Jewish sites were being vandalized in response to Israeli actions. And this is what was really interesting though. The conclusion was that this was political anti-Israel aggression. It was youthful vandalism. That was a word that was used to describe it. Intercommunal tensions was actually used to describe some of the things that happened in Paris. But it wasn't called anti-Semitism. Again, as though anger toward Israel somehow explained harassing Jewish worshipers or threatening Jewish school children. And obviously it was impermissible for these attacks against Jewish individuals and institutions to remain in this realm of politics. And at the time, this was again the early 2000s, this was really the origins of something called the working definition of anti-Semitism, a tool that would eventually become in a slightly different form, the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, really trying to showcase all forms of anti-Semitism. So before, or because we first saw this, general rise in anti-Jewish sentiment and anti-Jewish attacks in Europe, a decade, if not more, than we did in the United States. And because we saw this particular form of anti-Semitism, this anti-Israel anti-Semitism coming from predominantly the far left and also from Islamist extremist sources, there are these, I would say, about 6 lessons. There's probably more, but I'm going to hone it down to 6 for the interest of time that I wanted to quickly share just to the current situation in hopes that, we won't have Jews attacked or harassed or even killed, which is what happened actually in Marseille in 2012, which was, again, a reported response to the conflict in the Middle East. So several of these lessons have actually been shared by Simone Rodan-Binzakan. She's our director of AJC Europe, and I want to thank her for her contribution to these lessons. So the first lesson that we've really come up with is actually that we cannot think that this is going to pass, that this is only due to the current conflict. We know that anti-Semitism will not just go away, and no country or state is really safe unless something is done about it. And I think the question that we have to ask ourselves now is, does our leaders' focus and vigilance remain when anti-Semitism is not making headlines? So it's there now because anti-Semitism is in the news, but like when it's no longer in the news, is that vigilance remaining? And right now, actually in Europe, each EU member state has actually been tasked to develop an action plan or a national strategy of how their country is going to specifically combat anti-Semitism in the long term. So it's consistent. Whether there's ebbs and flows of anti-Semitism, this plan is consistent. They're constantly working toward achieving goals. So I think that's actually something that we can begin to do here and should be doing here in the United States, maybe at the state level, preparing a clear action plan and committing the necessary resources to fight it. The second lesson is that we know the importance of being aware of the problem early and not denying it. There was a lot of denial in the early 2000s in Europe. And I actually think here in the United States, we're actually at a better place. I do not think our leaders and our allies are denying there's a problem. They know there's a problem. They're speaking out against it. But where I do think there is confusion and disagreement even is what constitutes anti-Semitism and where it comes from. And that's where we're kind of seeing some equivocation with some of our leaders. So, as the Jewish community, as allies of the Jewish community, as Jewish organizations, I think we really need to unequivocally identify the different sources of anti-Semitism and speak out unambiguously, even if it's not easy. We know that minorities can suffer from racism, but also be anti-Semitic. And I think that's one of the reasons it's still important to raise awareness about the attacks in Brooklyn or Jersey City or Muncie, even though the perpetrators of those attacks did not come from, the easy to identify, easy to call out far-right white supremacist source. And then one last comment real quick on being unambiguous. I think what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is really anti-Zionist discourse in the media and by some politicians having consequences for Jews. And we need to actually share that and explain what happened. And what we saw really from Los Angeles to New York, from Seattle to South Florida, really can be rooted in that and also in social media. And we have also seen how the current, I would say, unfortunately, even kind of like neo-Marxist binary in which our world is being viewed by some, it's like the oppressors versus oppressed and white versus black, brown. Like when one sees that world through this lens, Jews will be hurt. Yeah, and as will other communities. So, I think we need to be able to make that clear as well. Quickly, the third lesson from Europe, which we know, don't let anyone play politics with anti-Semitism. We actually need strong voices on the left to speak out and criticize like their own camp, just as we need strong voices on the right to actually criticize their own camp and not be playing this blame game. The fourth lesson is that there can never be any form of relativism and justification of anti-Semitism. This is really the establishment of a clear zero tolerance policy from government to law enforcement. There can be no feeling of impunity. This will only create further violence. On that note, we really need those to know who've committed hate crimes against Jews and that they'll be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And we really need to work toward having our legal system take anti-Semitism as seriously as it can. And I'm glad Mitch and shared this, but I don't think that really happened in New York City when we actually saw videos of one of the perpetrator who actually beat up the Jewish man unconscious, and he was released on bail, and you can see him celebrating actually on the shoulders of his friends, saying that he would do it again. When you see that, it shows that anti-Semitism just got a pass. It was okay to do it, and it could be done again. So that's really important. A fifth lesson, quickly, again, is the social media aspect. The uptick we have seen in anti-Semitic attitudes and actions in the last few weeks is really directly tied to social media, primarily playing out on TikTok and Instagram and affecting young people much more. It's image-based, it's infographics, memes, short videos that have really set the narrative, as have global influencers. And I do think that their posts and videos demonizing Israel, which were viewed and shared hundreds of thousands of times, has actually led to some of the real life consequences that we've seen as people have gone out and attacked Jews. Now, our First Amendment, like when we compare us with Europe, like our First Amendment remains sacrosanct, but there's more our government can do to keep social media platforms liable if their algorithms are proven to promote hateful, including anti-Semitic content. And then the last lesson that I just want to share is lesson from Europe that I think they've been dealing with this much longer than when we have, is really the importance of promoting national cohesion around the issue of anti-Semitism, that it is a societal issue for all Americans, and it's not just for the government or for the Jewish community to solve. And that was a big issue we saw in France and in Belgium, in Denmark, that, civil society, if you will, this is a problem of government. This is a problem for the Jewish community. It's not our problem. And I think the message we need to really make clear in America is that this is an American problem. This is a problem for all of us. And this is really going to come with coalition building and building relationships, which unfortunately have, I think, disintegrated in the past few years, and really focus on rebuilding that trust, which will go much further than logic and facts, and definitely much further than labeling people anti-Semites, which we do know can shut down conversations. So Diane, I'll just end there with those 6 lessons. I think the last thing I'll just note is that these efforts have to be sustained. There's not quick fixes. The security in front of the synagogue is the absolute most important thing, but we hope to get back to a point where we don't have that. And this is going to be a marathon, I think, but thank you.
Thank you so much for those 6 lessons. That was really instructive. Your 5th lesson was actually where I have a question. I think that obviously the physical safety and security of our people and institutions is paramount, but I think what's going on in the media is having a significant impact there. And I think the mainstream media, from my reading, has been slow to cover a lot of this. And social media, as all of you have said, has been fairly virulent. Could anybody comment on conversations, either with the social media platforms or mainstream media, being cognizant, obviously, of First Amendment issues, to try to tamp down on any of this?
I'm happy to maybe start on the social media angle. So obviously a lot of the work that we do is both sort of carrot and stick when it comes to social media. And so part of the work that we do is teach them how to identify anti-Semitism, right? And especially when it's in the context of Israel, you really have to have an expertise and know the language and the terms that are used and the meaning behind it in order for anybody to be able to, say, deplatform people who use that sort of language. So we train them in a sense. We teach them how to fish by giving them information on how to identify it, which we use, right, as we are tracking it. At the same time, so that's the carrot, I guess, right? Working within and trying to educate so that they could do a better job of stopping the exploitation of their platforms. At the same time, when 17,000 tweets saying Hitler was right are on Twitter, you got to call that out. You have to hold them accountable. You have to get people who are influencers, business leaders, et cetera, to demand, right? And it's not unreasonable for users to demand that the platforms that they use that are making a lot of money are going to do a better job. And so, listen, the truth is it's been a mixed bag, right? Some companies are doing better than others. But I think, again, both sort of calling them out, but then also providing them with the tools on how to do better is the strategy that we've used. And I think that's the way forward.
Oren, I'll just add quickly to what Oren was saying. We have seen in the last couple of weeks, just when there's such a heightened tension or conflict in the world, these platforms are being bombarded with more content really than they are in normal times, and they deal with it through automatic algorithmic automation through AI, and then there is still human moderation. But what happens is we saw with this most recent conflict, there's so many, I don't want to say just like pro-Palestinian activists, but there was a case where a lot of the Israel content, the pro-Israel content was being flagged as violating of standards. And I think this probably happened on both sides, but I know of instances where there was mass flagging of Jewish accounts, of pro-Israel accounts, saying that they violated Instagram standards, they violated TikTok standards, when they really didn't. But this is like being sent to these human moderators and in mass. And there had been some things that had been removed probably inappropriately, and we were able to have some successes getting it back up. But that's just a challenge that these companies are having to deal with, and something that we're going to have to continue to work with them on.
And Holly, if I could jump in, with the social media aspect and with law enforcement and the community, there is a concerted effort now with law enforcement at the highest levels. We spent a couple weeks ago visiting FBI headquarters where they at the National Threat Operations Center in West Virginia, working in a more cohesive way to share information. And they are now working with social media companies. They have a whole section within the FBI now that works daily with social media and really analyzing what that threat is with the algorithms that we're talking about, that those 17,000 tweets on anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian movements. And one thing Holly said that I think is really important, and one of her takeaways, and I actually jotted a note that I think it's important to understand, we're really good at coordinating with law enforcement in our bigger cities and working with law enforcement on a daily basis where we have security directors. You need to know that all our federal offices, all our U.S. attorney's offices now across the country really have identified that individual in there that is the hate crimes coordinator. That's that United States attorney, that assistant United States attorney that is really looking at this threat for our community. So when something gets reported to a local police that might seem to be protected First Amendment right speech, we still report it. We still get it to that task force within the JTTFs where those folks are looking at hate crimes on a daily basis to get that to that religious outreach coordinators at the U.S. Attorney's Office so we can really analyze those threats and take this reporting that we're seeing on a daily basis. And we are seeing more increased support from law enforcement because of that. And it's really our job as as communal security professionals to really push that out to our community, one, to report, and then two, to work with our law enforcement partners to take it serious, to do an assessment. And we've had so many incidents where we've taken what might look like protected First Amendment right speech, get it to our duty desk, get it with our investigators, our security directors in the field, and predicate actual investigations and turn that back over to law enforcement. So that's that total immersion engagement with our community and law enforcement, which is really going to make the difference and really help keep our community safe. So I think that's important to say, and I appreciated Holly's points on that. I just wanted to expand on.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask people to try to be succinct with their questions. Rachel, the next question, please.
Next question is from Dan Mariashin of B'nai B'rith International.
Am I unmuted? I am. First of all, I want to thank all four speakers. Presentations really were detailed and exactly what we need at this moment. But I don't have a question as much as I have a comment. I want to pick up on something that Holly said. She talked about the IRA definition. In fact, I think yesterday was actually the anniversary of the adoption of the IRA definition. And in the last couple of months, we've had a big discussion about alternative definitions. But the IRA definition, the genius of the IRA definition is that it relates directly to the problem that we have right now in the streets and in Europe, as well as in Europe. In the past several years, we've just said IRA really relates to Europe, doesn't relate to us. It relates very much to us. And I think all of us need to redouble our efforts, particularly now, read the definition again to see how it relates to what's happening today, to support the expansion of the adoption of the IRA definition everywhere, whether it's at the government level and at the nonprofit level, community level, wherever it is.
Thank you, Dan. That's absolutely right. It's become very real for all of us here. We really appreciate your comment. Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Esther Epstein of the ADL.
Thank you. I wanted to point out that I feel so strongly that because we have all come together today and we all represent different Jewish organizations, that it is so important for us to work together. In other times, we all have our own little niches and we're all fundraising, we're all trying to speak with elected officials, we all do our job and we do it well. But I think now is the time for us to work together and work as a team. And I'm so glad that the Council of Presidents has put this together because there are so many of us on this call. And I just wanted to point out that at 4 o'clock this afternoon, we have a day of action, which is a virtual rally that I know ADL has started, and so many people are on board. And I'm so glad that the Council of Presidents has emailed it to all of their constituencies. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that that we need to be on the same page when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism. And I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you, Esther. I think we all agree with that. And, all of us at the conference want to make sure that we continue to collaborate and work together to amplify our voice so that we are really heard and that the coalition building and all of what we need gets done. So Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Mort Klein of the ZOA.
Yes, thank you. What role do you think Congress members have played who have been repeatedly making speeches that Israel's a genocidal apartheid state, evil state, supporting BDS? You know the people, Omar Tlaib, AOC, Bush, Sanders. What role do they have in promoting this anti-Semitism? Should we be demanding that the leaders of that party publicly condemn them by name? And secondly, no one has talked about the fact that almost every attack against Jews, I believe, has been by Arab Muslims or Blacks. Why is that? What can we do about it? Should we say something about Black Lives Matter, who's now come out supporting Hamas and condemning Israel as a settler colonial project? So my question is about the Congress members Arab Muslims and blacks are the ones primarily attacking Jews, and Black Lives Matter coming out with vicious statements against Israel.
Oren, do you want to start on that one?
Sure. I think what we need to do is do what we have been doing as a community, which is calling out leaders on the left and the right many times for crossing the line into demonizing the state of Israel, for their Holocaust comparisons, their dual loyalty tropes, just to name a few. I think to underscore what Estes said, it's really important, though, at this time that we don't look at the issue of anti-Semitism, and I think Holly said this in her remarks too, as an issue that is primarily on the left, primarily on the right. We know that anti-Semitism pervades everything. And let's not try to score political points at this time, but rather speak out together against leaders who cross that line. I will say, in terms of the Black Lives Matter, I think the overwhelming majority of BLM protesters across the country, certainly last summer, are not even necessarily aware of some of its leadership or members and their statements on Israel. The main focus of BLM continues to be the goal stated in their mandate, essentially, which is a more just and equitable society. So I think we make a mistake when we ascribe the comments of some members of BLM, or more precisely, the movement for Black Lives, on the entire movement. So I just wholly reject that BLM is an anti-Israel movement. I think we need to recognize that, like any movement, there are bad seeds, there are anti-Israel activists, there's anti-Semites, and focus on calling that out without necessarily ascribing it to the entire movement. And that's what we'll do.
Does anybody else want to comment on that?
I'll just add to Mort's point. I mean, we don't have direct proof, right? But like, I do think that when our congressional leaders use words like apartheid or settler colonial state or ethno state, that does kind of convey a message that this shouldn't exist or this should be dismantled. I don't think that gives a direct excuse to attacking Jews, and we don't necessarily know what the people who perpetrated these crimes against Jews, from Los Angeles to New York, were thinking, or what they were reading. But we have to call out that language, and we have to say this is actually not appropriate, this isn't right. I mean, we've got whole descriptions of why Israel is not a settler colonial state, and really work actually with our Black partners on why this is important and why this is actually problematic when you just, again, I think I might have mentioned it, when you just see that world in the simplified kind of neo-Marxist view. There have still been incidents, and I'll look to my more my data collectors, but I know there's still been white supremacists attacking Jews in the last 2 weeks. In fact, they've actually been using Palestinian flags. I think one was mentioned, but there was this van in South Florida, in Boca Raton, white supremacists, but brandishing a Palestinian flag because they knew that was where I think the zeitgeist, if you will, was, and that's fully inappropriate. And so I think we have to be that swivel-headed and still, look at this very complex situation and calling it out where we see it, but not just labeling it to one source.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Joel Rubin of American Jewish Congress.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rahel, for calling on me, and thanks to all the presenters as well for sharing your wisdom here this morning. I'm wearing my Pittsburgh hat also, Bradley, in honor of our Steelers. So apologies to non-Steelers fans. I'm from Squirrel Hill originally and grew up around the block from Tree of Life, so this hits home quite a bit. And this convergence of hate that we're seeing right now, and I've been in a lot of conversations with friends and allies across the spectrum politically. It's visceral. It's centered on Israel right now, and there's a tension point. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on how to effectively communicate to coalition partners and communities of color. Has been brought up, ethnic communities with whom the Jewish community has partnered for a number of years now, countering white supremacy. Now to watch this dynamic unfold, where I think there, quite frankly, was a bit of a letdown. I'm trying to be diplomatic in the Jewish community about the slowness of the response to come to our defense. And I wanted to get your wisdom and hear your thoughts on the way to navigate this and motivate quicker response, change in tone. I've tried to do that. I'll just say, I'll close with this. I've tried to do that in the media and behind the scenes to a certain effect. But I wanted to get your sense of how public, how private. What do you see as the most effective ways to get the message across to allies who really have not been there right now in these last few days?
Okay, I know Oren needs to jump off shortly. Maybe Oren, you could comment first, and then we'll see who else wants to add.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So thanks for the question. I think I just want to sort of say I hear the idea that at moments like this, when the Jewish community feels under attack and the allyship that the Jewish community shows to various other communities, we don't always feel like it's coming back right to us. And I think that's a valid concern. And I know that it's one that a lot of people feel. But you mentioned a couple things like continuing to have discussions with communities in the background. So like the AAPI community just went through a wave of hatred against that community. And we have built relationships by speaking out against that. And I actually feel like some in the AAPI community have spoken out for the first time during this particular wave of anti-Semitism. So this is not something that happens overnight, but it's through building relationships over time. And I think we have seen some success there. And I think instead of always speaking out, but also doing that while also bringing people in remains really critical, right? Having those discussions with them. And then I'll just say one other thing before I jump off, which is there was an example that I saw on social media the other day. Actor Mike Ruffalo, I think, was talking about, I may have gotten the name wrong. Great actor, by the way. He basically called sort of what was happening by the Israelis genocide and other sort of language. And then people talked to him. And then he very publicly said, hey, I've thought about what I said. It's not accurate. I'm going to do better. And the reason that's so important is because it modeled the way of somebody getting called out for doing something wrong, but then being brought into the community and saying, hey, there's a way around this and there's a learning moment. And I think he did it well. I think people appreciated it. And then we uplifted the fact, right, that somebody was able to have this sort of either epiphany or sort of enlightenment and then take it upon themselves to speak out. So that, maybe started negative, but turned into a positive. And I would just use that as another model of what I hope we can do by actually reaching out to those people and explaining to them on a person-to-person level, this is why this is so impactful. And it worked in that case. So I'm going to jump off, but thank you all for having me, and I'll see you again soon, I'm sure. Bye.
Bye, Oren.
Thank you for joining. Does anybody else want to comment on that?
I think it's very important, pre-incident, pre any one of these attacks, we look at communities that have good, strong relationships, interfaith relationships with our CRC, with our community security directors. What I've really seen is communities that have combined efforts and outreach within safety and security and community relation, where we continually forge and foster relationship between Jewish community, Muslim community, African-American community, and that we're talking pre-incident, that we build those relationships. And when something bad happens, we use and leverage what goodwill we've gleaned through that organization. And I've seen in communities where it's incredibly strong, and I've seen communities where it's not. And when something bad happens, we're trying to pick up the pieces and build that connectivity. Now's the time to do it. If we don't, if we do have good connectivity, we just utilize those resources, because the threat, honestly, traditionally over the last couple of years to the Jewish community is the same threat to the Muslim community, the same threat to the African-American community. So if we're all on the same page, when something bad happens, I think we're better able to react, and we put ourselves in a better position.
Thank you. Mitch, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think, pre-incident is great, but now that we've had these incidents, based on these relationships, interfaith, that the Jewish community has built, across the divide, two Muslim faith leaders, it'd be wonderful if we could have some of those people come out and say, listen, you feel strongly about Gaza and Israel, you want to protest, absolutely fine. It's part of the American tradition, but please make it clear to your followers, to your religious community, that it is not acceptable to commit violence in the streets of the United States against Jews. It's just not acceptable. And I think I'd like to see more of that messaging from the relationships that I know the Jewish community, different parts of the country has developed with Muslim faith leaders. Understand that it's very politically fraught, but I think there is a formulation that allows them to keep their own legitimacy, when it comes to the Israel-Palestinian issue, but at the same time come out against what is not acceptable, where the red lines are, which is violence.
Thank you very much. Rachel, next question, please.
Next question is from Johanna Gutman of Amuna.
Hi, thank you so much for a really incredible panel and presentation, very comprehensive. I really want to applaud all the efforts for the behind the scenes work that is going on with reaching out to our public officials and to law enforcement to protect Jews and our institutions. I think that we really are losing the battle in terms of public opinion, and I'm wondering why we don't have a more public support for Israel, or at least against anti-Semitism, where all the organizations could come out together in a physical rally.
Holly, maybe just talk about a little bit the support question, and then if someone else wants to discuss the physical rally, I don't know if that's in your bailiwick, but I think some of the first part of that question is.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense of this public opinion question. I mean, at least on social media, I don't want to say that we lost the war. I mean, these are these battles that we have to continue to learn from. But we do know, we're getting some reports in that unfortunately the Jewish community, especially young Jews, were particularly really targeted during the last few weeks. And it has a lot to do, I think, with just the simplified version of reality. Again, with this, when you have that oppressor versus oppressive, oppressed mindset, that black versus brown, this idea of that Israel is a colonial settler state, like this language that's just being thrown around, apartheid, and young people are seeing that with their celebrities posting it. They're living mostly on, either online, and it's just this simplified version. I think we really do need to rally, and actually, and we've tried this with experiential learning, bringing people to Israel, seeing the reality on the ground. But that needs to really be amplified. And I actually really do think there needs to be some really major social media campaign, physical rally, yes, but for the Jewish organizations to really come together and to launch something very proactively on social media, to work with tech companies like TikTok, to have their algorithm actually promote that content, and be ready for the backlash. I should have noted that Mark Ruffalo got a lot of backlash for doing that. In fact, really anti-Semitic, like that the Jews made him do this. Like, this is the kind of stuff that unfortunately is going to happen, we'll face, but we'll get over that. And I think that's the next 10 years. I really see that as the next 10 years.
Okay, does anybody else want to comment on that?
I just think on the physical security side, yes, I agree with rallies. Yes, I agree with pro-Israel. But when we do those physical on-site rallies, we need to take into account security, and we need to take into account the backlash, as Holly just said, on the back end of it. We absolutely need to be prepared, have a plan, and even have an exit strategy for our demonstrators, and talk about that prior to the rally. Give them that logistical admonishment if something bad happens, right? We don't expect that. We don't want violence, right? But we have to plan for it. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Brad. Next question is from William Darrell.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Diane. And actually, with apologies to those who have their hands up, we have 1 minute left before our time expires. So we'll get to you guys on the next Zoom. I do just want to thank our panelists for speaking today, and also to underscore what the point that Esther made earlier, which is that we are in this together as a community. We may have disagreements along the way on all sorts of issues about what this started, how we should respond, how to move forward, how to engage with the general community. But we are all this in together. When it comes down to it, when the barricades come up, we will all be on one side of those barricades together. And I think it's important that we ensure that as a community, we speak as one voice, we move forward as one voice, we focus on those who are attacking us rather than attacking our own co-religionists and our co-organizations along the way. So with that as a marching order going forward, I will see many of you, I'm sure, at the 4 o'clock session that many of our organizations are co-sponsoring to combat anti-Semitism, and look forward to walking arm in arm with each of you and with each of the 53 organizations within the Conference of Presidents to tackle this scourge. We made great progress. 51 of our 53 organizations endorsed the IHRA definition, which, as Dan Mariaschin mentioned very early in this call, is so much in focus with what we're seeing today. The examples that the opponents of the IHRA definition point to are the examples that conflate anti-Zionism, anti-Israel action with anti-Semitism. And what we are seeing over these last 2 weeks with synagogues being targeted, with Jews with kippot being targeted, brings home more than ever the importance of that definition, the importance of having a definition that is internationally agreed upon, that will allow us to fight anti-Semitism with an agreement of what it means. So with that, thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for participating. Looking forward to seeing you all again. And from Israel, I wish you all an early Shabbat Shalom. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that concludes the Zoom. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Oren, for being with us.
And Mitch.
And Mitch as well. Mitch, thank you as well. That concludes the Zoom. We'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye.